Hi, this is Sylvan. When I started my first company, Jim Hopper, I had to learn how to calculate and pay salaries. No one taught me these things at university, so I had to ask my accountant at the time for help. Their solution was a clunky Excel file where I could manually calculate salaries each month. Not only did that mean lots of manual work, but also the very real possibility of errors slipping through the cracks. Meanwhile, dedicated software has replaced Excel, but Quit Business goes one step further. This ETH spin-off not only supports but also takes over the entire administration of employees for startups, from the registration with the authorities to the selection of insurances to managing the entire payroll accounting. All you need to get started are a few mouse clicks. Simple, efficient, and error-free. Visit quit.business and get the service 1 year for free with the code Swisspreneur. That's QUITT.business.
It's not so much about making a big pot of money with it or growing a company like crazy, but it's just nice to be in a space where things are happening, everybody's optimistic. It's not about pushing the other person out, but rather creating things together.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Ansuya.
All right, so I'm super happy to be here today with you, Tim. Tim is the co-founder and CEO of Xilva, which is a global forest marketplace platform. As well, he's been a serial entrepreneur in the past and an angel investor as a result of that. And he is the founder and president of TEDx Zurich. So before we get into the topic of today, I wanted to also get to know a bit about you and your journey. You've had a 2-decade-long corporate and a mixed career with startups as well. So if you could tell us a bit about what motivated you to change the scenery and how has that journey been for you?
Yeah, it's maybe you asked me about the corporate when we had the conversation before. You asked me about the corporate, and it's an interesting one because so basically what I did is I did a bank apprenticeship and then studied at St. Gallen University, did a Liz-Ök master's in business, and then I created. During the PhD, I joined a spin-off of the university that was quite small at the time called Namix. And I was employee number 7. So at that time, it definitely was a startup. And then I stayed for a very long time. And I still was under the impression that it was a startup, but it wasn't, of course, because we were 500 people at the end. So it was something quite different. Anyway, but that is in the eyes of the beholder, whether it's still a startup or corporate. But we had a lot to do also with corporate clients, obviously. So we exited the company in 2018. So we sold it to Dentsu, a global advertising firm. And then basically I was in the fortunate situation that I was free and had a little bit of money. And then had to think about what to do next. And I came up with 2 things. And one was that I wanted to start something small again. So really do a startup again, not a pretend startup, but a real startup. And the second one was that I wanted to be in the climate space. And the 2 reasons for that, basically, one is that it's a very important topic at the moment. I mean, I think we all agree, if you're here for an event for this type, I think you all agree that this is a super important topic. And it's also a super important opportunity at the moment. So if you look at what are the areas where there are business opportunities at the moment, I think it's definitely in that space. And that is important because I think it's nice to be in an area that's growing and where things are happening, right? It's not so much about making a big pot of money with it or growing a company like crazy, but it's just nice to be in a space where things are happening, everybody's optimistic. It's not about pushing the other person out, but rather creating things together. So that was basically my givens. And then I met one of my co-founders who was a forester. And he told me about the incredible power of forests to solve the climate crisis, solve the biodiversity crisis, and about the inefficiency that was in that market. where it's really hard for investors to invest in the space and really hard for the forest projects to get money. Then I said, okay, I've solved inefficiencies or inefficient markets before. Let's do something together. And then we brought in 2 more co-founders. One of them is here, Lorenzo, in the back there. Yeah. So if you want to talk about Xilva later and want to hear the second story, then you can talk to Lorenzo at the drinks. And then we started to build a company. We started in end of 21. We're now 11 people. Based here in Zurich, parts of the team in Spain, parts of the team in Serbia, doing fine and building the platform, building the forests relationships, so the supply side in marketplace terms, and then of course the demand side with corporate clients, impact investors who put money into the projects.
So tell us a bit more as well, your experience as an angel investor. Like, how have you seen the Swiss startup ecosystem change, throughout the period?
Well, I mean, the sample isn't that super long. So I did the first angel investments in 2009, I think. But then didn't do very much because I didn't have very much money. And then a little bit more when we sold Namix, starting in 2019. So the core sample is actually from 2019 to now.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, it's a professional space. We mostly do, in that space, we mostly do B2B SaaS because that's where we have the sort of experience and also can contribute something beyond the money.
Right.
And there, I would say it's a relatively well-organized space by now. You have companies, you have founders, you have VCs that invest in that space, you have clients willing to also take a risk or deal with a startup. So I would say in that space, it's a very established infrastructure by now. I mean, there's always this criticism that Series A plus, it's getting harder to get money in Switzerland. That is probably still true.
Also because of the financial climate in general, you would say?
That's a different one. So one thing is that, do you find investors for Series A, Series B in Switzerland? And probably you have to go beyond Switzerland, but you can also do that now. You have Leggy, they have Silicon Valley investors in there, for example. I think Yoko also had some big investors from outside Switzerland. So that is working. But of course, in the moment, the funding climate is really bad. I mean, that's also a truth, right? So if you want to raise a Series A or a Series B with, I mean, if you raise, you need the money, right? So you're probably not 100% sorted in all aspects of your business, then it's really hard to get money. I wouldn't discourage you from setting something up now, because if you create a company now, then you'll be ready for first small tranches of money, probably in 3 months, 5 months or something. Then you'll be ready for a pre-seed round in maybe half a year. I would expect then for the market to be much more friendly. So if you're thinking about whether to set up a company, it's probably a good time now to do it. I mean, that's no promise, but at least historically, that's the way it worked, right? You have a downturn, and then it comes up again, and then investors are looking for companies to invest in. So it's probably a good time to set up a company now.
Thank you for sharing. And let's dive into the topic of today, which is driving the future of impact through a sustainability startup, such as like the one you have. So when we talk about Xilva, you did touch upon it a little bit, but why forests and why reforestation? Why did that topic in particular draw you?
So forests, basically, the great thing about forests is that they are, first of all, they're a beautiful thing, right? I mean, you go to the forest, you say, oh, that's perfect. I still prefer a forest to a Climeworks machine, even though they look nice as well, but forests are a cool thing. And they are technologically proven, right? Existence, some people say since 385 million years, give or take. So it's a proven technology. You don't have to invent anything. It's super highly scalable in terms of where you can put forests and what amount of CO2 sequestration you can do with it. There is between 1/3 and 40% of the all the CO2 that was ever put into the atmosphere by humans can be taken out by forests. So that's a massive scale. So there is a nice graph by the IPCC that has the International Panel on Climate Change that has the different interventions and the costs. Quite a complicated chart, but you just have to look at all the long bars. They all have to do with forests. Basically, that's the short summary, right? So if you want to do something about the climate, you definitely have to do it with forests. You have to do other things as well. That's the nice thing about a growing market. There is not this or that, but there is this and that and that, and hopefully something else. But forests are definitely a big part of the solution. And they're also helping in other areas. Biodiversity is one super important aspect. So if you do a project right, it helps biodiversity. They also provide social benefits to local communities. So you actually improve livelihoods of local people if you do the project right.
Yeah.
If you don't do it right, and if you don't create a situation where the local communities benefit as well, then you have a problem with your forest, typically. But if you do that all right, then you have that benefit as well. And you have a positive impact on water, for example, on cooling directly, not just indirectly with the carbon, but directly as well. So nothing negative about forests, I would say, and a lot of positives.
Right. And if we get into the model a little bit, like how does Xilva help the people with capital and the people looking for funds?
Yeah. Maybe one thing I forgot, it's very cost efficient as well. So if you compare it to other climate technologies, and the advantage in climate, a little bit harder in biodiversity, but in climate you can actually really compare the technologies. The cost per ton is much lower than in other technologies. What we do basically is that has something that emerged over time. When we started Xilva, we didn't think it was so important. But it's really, really important that we do a quality check of the projects. So the projects come to us, say, hey, I want to get listed, either when they produce credits already, carbon credits, the project is certified, producing carbon credits, or when it's in a very early stage. So they typically have an idea what they want to do, they have a team, and they have the land to do it on, but they don't have much more. They are startups, essentially. They can also come to get funded. And then we look very much in depth and much deeper than we had foreseen initially to really vet and gauge the quality and give the investors assurance that they are investing in a super good project that they can have confidence in. And that's a very discriminating step. So overall, it's about 6% of the projects that make it through that grading.
Is this the proprietary methodology of Xilva Grade?
Xilva Grade, exactly. That's our methodology. So we put the projects through that process. In some cases, they come and we see issues and we can help them to improve their grading, especially when they're very early stage. Then they actually very, very happy to get feedback and the chance to improve. And then we list, and then we have clients coming to the platform or coming to us directly. That's also sometimes the case. And we help them find a forest to invest in.
Okay. So basically, I mean, to fight climate change, it's a very complex problem, right? A multifaceted issue.
Okay, yeah.
How big of a role do you think sustainability-focused startups will play in this or are playing in it?
Well, I think startups can't do it all. That's for sure. And even if you take a route where startups grow and to grow exponentially, even I think it's not can't be solved. Climate change can't be solved by startups. That is surely not possible. But I mean, the even on a more philosophical standpoint, entrepreneurship and new ideas and entrepreneurs who take initiative are a super important element to find out what works. And that's also, I mean, there was a voluntary carbon market, or is the voluntary carbon market that came under some criticism. all good and well, and maybe we get a chance to talk about that. But the good thing is something is happening, right? There are real people putting real money into real projects, and that is an advantage. And that's same with startups, right? You have people who try to do things, who try to find out what works, what doesn't. And that is a super important laboratory in that sense for the world to discover the solutions that work best, and hopefully many of them, not just forests, but many others as well. So in that sense, I think startups have a very important role in facilitating and selecting and further developing new solutions that can help solve this.
So a lot of these solutions, which are clean tech startups are coming up with, it's also a responsibility of governments as well, and them butting heads together. How do you feel like they can cooperate better in this space?
Well, I think there is a role for government in startups creating favorable environments, creating things like this. This is paid by the City of Zurich, so thank you very much, City of Zurich. And things like that, creating favorable tax environments, legal environments, etc. That's an aspect. There is also grant programs, smaller ones, bigger ones. That is a role. And then I think it's also about taking risks in also buying from startups. That is something that maybe could be improved, because you have typically in government context, you have very complex, for good reason, complex purchasing rules that make it very hard for startups to actually get supply to the government. And that could maybe be an improvement there, where you say, okay, you create a situation where you make it possible for a startup that doesn't have decades of experience in selling to the government to actually supply solutions. Not really a thing for us so much, but I would imagine many climate technologies where it would actually benefit. And now you see more large corporations, large technology firms, for example, who take this role as lead customers. So they take risks. For example, Microsoft has a program where they say, you create a new climate technology to take carbon out of the air. Super. We give you a pre-purchase commitment for a very high price, I think $600 per ton, $600 per ton, which is about 20 times as much as it would take with forests. But we give you that commitment if you invent this new technology, and we give you a piece of paper saying that, and you can show it to your investors saying, I just have to finish my technology, and then Microsoft will buy it for $600 per ton.
Like a letter of intent.
A letter of intent, or I think it's even more, actually. Okay. It's a pre-purchase commitment. I haven't seen the paper, so I hope it's serious. But that is a super important example, or an example of a super important role that a large organization, and probably also a government, could play in this, to basically say, hey, we don't know exactly what this is, but if you get it to work, we pay you real money for it. Okay. That could be something, a way, for example, that the government...
To really support these endeavors.
And startups or big companies and startups could work together, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So we were briefly mentioning also about the complexities and challenges with startups in the carbon market. Can you touch upon that a bit more?
You mean the current discussions about... I mean, there is basically I don't know how familiar you're all with the carbon market. So there was a big discussion about a certification standard called Verra, where there were carbon credits issued for avoided deforestation, which is a specific category of carbon credits that are basically granted for avoiding deforestation, so for not cutting down a tree. And there you have a couple of issues. So you have to basically calculate a baseline. So basically you're arguing against the counterfactual. You're saying, if this project hadn't happened, so many trees would have been cut down. And we're not doing, you're paying into the project, you're not doing the deforestation, and then you get these carbon credits that you can then sell. That is a methodologically difficult thing to do. These methods exist for quite a time. They've improved a lot. They will continue to improve.
Is it difficult also because it's hypothetical as well in nature?
That's exactly why it is difficult.
Because this scenario could happen, preventing it.
And you have measures where you do that, and where you compare it with other areas, etc. It works, but that is difficult. And I think that scrutiny that has happened also to a company that is very close to me, as South Pole.
Yeah.
We know them very well. They're very respected, very big. This scrutiny, I think, is important in the sense that that's exactly how markets work. I always say markets are the best teachers. The market says, hey, this is not right. Then you improve it. Then something better comes out. And then the world moves ahead and is at a higher plane. And the carbon credits are better and the projects are better. That's exactly, I think, the positive of it. The negative would be if that would lead to a situation where people say, yeah, let's not do anything for a while. Yeah?
Right.
Because that's...
you're taking no action.
Exactly. It's
but
green,
about...
not greenwashing, but green hushing or green waiting. That's what we see with some companies. And I mean, we have a little bit of a closer look at what some companies do. And I would say in some cases it's like that. They say, oh, very difficult. We can't spend anything this year. And
but how would you differentiate between green hushing and greenwashing? Because the greenwashing is also a very common problem.
Well, greenwashing means you commit to something and then you do something that is not really helping the environment.
Right.
Green hushing means you don't commit to anything. You just keep calm and hope that nobody asks you. And the green waiting means you commit to something and then you say, oh, it's very difficult. I can't do anything. So I rather wait and don't spend anything. That's my unscientific definition.
They're waiting because they don't want to be in that greenwashing situation.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I would still say it's time for action. So you should take action and keep pushing for the better, but also do things. That would be my take. What should be done.
So then, what does it take for a startup to be truly called sustainable?
I mean, sustainable is not really a protected term. We could say you can certify. I mean, we can talk about certification for that later. But it's in general, it's an open term. I think there is a big distinction between: do you have a sustainability business model? So, is your business actually in, for example, taking out carbon from the atmosphere or improving that biodiversity or something like that? Or do you have a normal startup and it's just sustainability is ingrained in your business model? Or do you have a actually unsustainable business model and you try to green paint it a bit? And that is very different, right? So we've decided to do a real sustainability focused business model. So our goal, our mission is to create more forests than the world has ever seen and realize all the climate and biodiversity advantages of forests. But that's not the only way to do it. You can also say I deeply integrate it into my business model, that I do something good for the environment, that I create a circular economy model, even though I sell clothing, for example, but I do it in a way that is much better for the environment. Yeah.
Can you explain or elaborate a bit more, like how you balance impact and business decisions in Xilva?
I mean, for us, it's actually typically ultimately not a balance that where you sit there and say, hey, shall we do this? This has impact, but it doesn't make money. Because we live very much from reputation, right? So let's say we create an investment or we facilitate investment, tell an investor, hey, put it into this forest project, and it turns out to be a total scam. Let's hypothetically, we are not doing that. Fingers crossed, exactly. But let's hypothetically think that would happen. Yeah. That would basically kill us, right? So it would destroy all the value we've created over the last 18 months. So we have a very big interest in not creating a situation like that. We have a very high interest to actually provide the best impact we can. I mean, my experience is it never works that you say, yeah, we are pretending we're having some impact and we know we don't have it, but we hope that nobody discovers it. This doesn't work anymore. That's not the way the world works in the time of internet, full transparency. Doesn't work. It's not a good idea. So in our case, it's not really so much of a balance or a way we have to say, oh, we weigh the impact higher or we weigh the business success higher. I mean, of course you could say, I mean, we basically we take a transaction fee. You could say that maybe has a little bit that effect where we say, okay, if the transaction fee is very high, we make a lot of money, but less goes to the forest project. But on the other hand, then we'll also be competed out of the market, right? So, yeah. I mean, there is.
So then 2 questions about that. One is like, what kind of investors get attracted to your proposition? Like, how would you describe that persona?
Yeah.
And secondly, who are your competitors then?
Yeah. So the clients, I would say there is a couple of categories. There is companies that have made a net zero commitment, for example.
So corporates or bigger
corporates, exactly. They've signed up to the Science Based Target Initiative, for example. Have said they will be net zero by 2030, will avoid CO2 or greenhouse gases, and also compensate for the ones. And they also realize now that 2030 is actually not that far away anymore. So they want to do something. And they can come to us and either buy carbon credits through our platform. So they can basically say, okay, we want to buy those carbon credits. What we see more now is that they also invest in projects. So they're not just buying carbon credits from existing projects, but they invest in earlier stage projects that are being created, and they invest for a return in the form of carbon credits. So they say, we don't buy the credits from a project that's already there, but we help create one. And that is a much better story, if you wish, for the company. If you can say, hey, we didn't just send some money to the project and they sent us back some piece of paper, but we actually created this project or we helped create it. So that's something that we see increasingly. A more difficult, more complex decision, of course, takes also a bit longer typically. But of course, a very attractive one in terms of reputation. So you have the corporates investing in credits, investing in projects. And then you have impact investors. So that would be investors of different kinds, asset managers, family offices, development finance institutions who invest in the projects and ultimately get a return in the form of interest or an equity return, a dividend or a typical equity return.
Okay. And in terms of then telling them that, this is the carbon credits you have, how do you make these calculations, and are there certifications as well involved here that you were speaking of?
Yeah, what you typically have is, if you want to offset or buy offset with carbon credits, then you buy them under a standard. So you have, there are 3 global ones that are most relevant: Verra, Gold Standard, and Plan Vivo. Those in forestry, we consider those the most relevant. Then there are a lot of local, regional ones. And basically what you have to do, if you want to do that, you create a project, create a plan team, and then at some point, you do an intervention, you plan an intervention and you do the intervention and you get it certified from a certification body. It's not us. And what we do is, and then you can issue the carbon credits. That's also audited, whether it's really happened the way you said. And then we do a double check of the project characteristics, of the carbon calculations, especially when we invest early stage, or our investors invest early stage, then of course they want to know whether certification is ever possible, because they put money in now. Certification happens in 3-4 years. So they have to know whether it's actually realistic what these guys plan.
And in terms of your competitors, who are they?
There is a couple of, I would say, carbon generalists or by this time quite big companies that have consultancy arms that help you do your net zero strategy, for example, and your carbon credit buying strategy. And then they also sell you carbon credits. So they say, I would suggest you buy something for 25, and I have something for 25 here. Can I sell this to you? And I'm exaggerating a bit, but they're typically not forestry specialists, even though some have very good forestry departments as well. That's one group of competitors. Then there is a couple of other marketplaces, typically not specialized on forests, but on carbon credits in general.
What are some other examples of other types?
There is a German one called Caesar. There is another German one called Senken. They are more on blockchain-based, have a blockchain-based model. Then there is an American one called Pachama. They are actually forest specialists, but also very much focused on creating their own credits ultimately with satellite image analysis. So it's a place, and that's something I think generalizable for creating a startup. If you've no competitors, then maybe there's a reason for that. So I would be rather worried if you have no competitors than having some valued competitors. And again, the space is big, right? So we have a good chance that so we don't have to fight anyone to basically say get this guy out of the market to get in ourselves. There is enough for everyone, and hopefully everyone succeeds so that we can realize actually all the forests that can be realized.
Yes. So in terms of going to investors, for example, like to get funds or for your projects, do you see a difference from a traditional company versus a sustainability startup in terms of how much information you need to divulge to them and what has to be explained or maybe even educated to them?
I mean, if I compare I can compare it more on the fundraising side because I've seen both worlds. I think you always need a bit of interest and experience on the side of the investor in the topic. So, I mean, if we say investment through the Xilva platform, there, of course, we can help. We can tell people how it works, consult a bit, yes. If you look at VC investment, for example, in our company, then you need experience in the field a bit. And that's something we discovered also that's a much easier conversation if you have some experience than when you have someone who is a general investor or a B2B SaaS investor or a B2C marketplace investor. That's typically more difficult to make the...
So if we go for these targeted investors, do you think right now this is the time is ripe? As you mentioned, a lot of corporates also have this 2030 target to meet. So are investors open now if one goes with such an idea?
I would say in the forest side, yes. That is definitely, I mean, it's always up and down, and you have questions like this Vera scandal, we say, oh, what's happening there? But companies also realize that they have to do something. They can't they can do some green waiting, but not for too long. I would say in the startup space, it's quite hard at the moment. That's I mean, that every startup will tell you that it's not so easy at the moment to find investors.
Okay. And in terms of talking about having a sustainable company culture, because that aspect is also there, how do you attract talent, which could easily get maybe a more higher paying job elsewhere?
I think a sustainability mission is a good argument for people. I mean, it's cool to be at a startup because you have more freedom to do things and create something actually than maybe in a corporate. And sustainability is even more attractive because you can help the planet by doing that cool stuff, right? So that is actually. I mean, we have to distinguish maybe a bit between the forester side of things. They are typically working in forestry, so they are in that space anyway. So that is I would say, normal for them to do these kind of things. For the product people, they're very highly motivated. I would say also sales, Lorenzo and sales team, they are very highly motivated also by the sustainability mission.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But I mean, going back to you mentioning also that, startups can't all make a full climate reversal here.
Yeah.
So many times one can also, if you're having an impact-driven business, be struck by climate grief. If you see things are not really moving the way that they should. Does that happen with you, or in your company? And if at all, how did you handle that?
Well, it happens, especially when you sense this green waiting aspect, maybe sometimes. But on the other hand, I mean, yeah, it's signed up for a road that's maybe not easy, right? So that's something that we have to live with and try to do our best. And if this doesn't work, then you have to try something else. Yeah. Okay. And ultimately, I think it's better to act than, I think for me at least, it would be more stress inducing if I were realizing that there is a problem with the climate and I wouldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
Rather try to do something and maybe fail 1 or 2 times. It's better than doing nothing and waiting for things to happen.
But do you ever worry that reforestation efforts may serve as an excuse for, the inaction of big polluters to phase out fossil fuels?
That is definitely a risk. And that is also, I would say, the current or the best compromise between something that a big company can sign up to and still providing a rigorous way to improve things is the Science-Based Target Initiative. And that has a clear framework. We say you reduce, you avoid, and then you offset, right? So you don't start with the offsetting and then say, the rest, whatever, but rather do the reduce step and the avoid step and then compensate only for the rest. And I think consumers, or I hope consumers will be more conscious of that. And reward these companies that do it that way and not the ones that just have some phony climate claim because they bought some cheap 2013 credits that they found somewhere and then say, no, we're all CO2 neutral. And you see that also the climate neutral claims. There were some companies that basically sold you certificates to be climate neutral, that they're stopping that because they realize that consumers are realizing, right? That's the beauty about markets. The market will hopefully, and we can all, as consumers, listen to that, and as companies provide the information, and so that hopefully the market will solve this and sort out the bad apples and basically only reward good climate action and not reward or even punish phony climate action.
Right. And in terms of this whole and clean tech, climate tech space, do you see that there is certain areas where there's more potential to do more, where you see that there's less of those kinds of companies? For example, in e-mobility space, let's say like in Zurich, there's not as much support as there can be for electric vehicles and electric mobility. That's one example that I can think of, but if you can think of something as well from your experience.
Well, I mean, I think in forest, there's definitely much more potential. So there is, sorry for pointing it out, but that is a big upside potential that there is, and it just needs more money and more action and more projects. And I'm sure if I had an e-mobility startup, I would say the same thing, right? And I would look deep into it and see things. I mean, what I like about Zurich is that it's actually a city where, luckily enough, you don't need as much e-mobility. I mean, if I was in Los Angeles last year, and that is just a crazy place. I mean, you can basically, if you want to solve their mobility problems, you basically have to take the city down and rebuild it completely from scratch, right? It's a really difficult one if you've gone too far in a way that is unsustainable, and build it into a city structure to remove that's quite hard.
Right. it's also then the problem of putting band-aids on a problem
exactly.
versus actually trying to
where you
solve
say
it.
it's very fundamental. Yeah, and I mean in Switzerland, luckily, I would say we have few of those areas where you can say, oh, this is systematically super unsustainable. I don't know, maybe a lot of too much beef, too much milk is maybe something that is so deep into the culture that it's hard to remove. But apart from that, I would say there is not super much that where we are fundamentally unsustainable in a way that can't be cured.
Understood. So let's get to our last segment of rapid fire questions.
Okay. Yes.
And then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A. So you ready?
Yes.
What's your favorite forest to go for a walk in?
It's actually in my city in Küsnacht. There is it's called the Tobel, and it's a Bach, a little creek that goes up, and you can go all the way up to Pfannstiel, where hopefully there will be some wind power soon. But that's the nicest place, just because it's very close for me. Yeah.
Okay. What's your biggest environmental sin?
Not having insulated our house early enough.
Okay. Ever since you started Xilva, have you ever felt like giving up?
Not really, no. We had a couple of difficult times when we had troubles to get our first fundraising. That was a difficult time, and then some point we realized, okay, we have a product problem. But my co-founders helped me out of this hole, so that was good. And we are now launching a couple of new products, actually. So if you are interested, have a look. Forest Plus coming out these days.
All right, wonderful. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want this to succeed. So I want to leave something good for my children. I have 3 children, so I want to leave something good for my children and leave a world that's a bit better than when we started. I was born at 325 ppm of CO2. Now it's 418. So we've done that in the last 50 years that I've been here. So hopefully reverse that a bit and also inspire people. I think that's another aspect that's especially if I look back to my last company, that was a very important aspect there, that there were a lot of people coming along all the way, part of the way, and inspiring them. That was a very important aspect, and it still is.
That also explains your initiative to do TEDx in Zurich.
Yeah, that's one
inspiring.
Inspiring and
empowering ideas. I think
providing exactly a space for ideas. Exactly.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much.
And had a pleasure to speak with you. So now we can open it up to the audience.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.